You can only overlook offenses that are actual offenses that you have a right to be overlooked. You can only lay down the right to be offended when you had the right to be offended in the first place, right? So the fact that you have a right to be offended is not relevant. Well, hello and welcome to Sunday Morning with Hope Valley Church. I'm Pastor Sam. I'm the lead pastor here at Hope Valley, and today is the fourth part in a series that we're calling You Asked For It. And really what we're doing in this series is some people from the church have submitted some questions, some topics that they'd like to have answered and discussed in a Sunday morning message. And so today the question that we are tackling is this question of how can I get better at communication in relationships? It's a big question, and it affects really all of our relationships, especially our closest ones, like our marriages and our immediate families, right? And really close friendships. And so what we're going to do is we're going to read through some passages, some scriptures that I've laid out for this morning that I think will help us answer this question. Then we're going to draw some conclusions from what we read in the scripture, and then we're going to look at some next steps, some things that we can actually do with what we've read and learned today. All right. So again, the question is, how can I get better at communication in relationships? We're going to start by going to Proverbs, and we're going to be here. We're going to look at Proverbs 17:9 first. And it says very simply, love prospers when a fault is forgiven, but dwelling on it separates close friends. And if we look at Proverbs 19:11, it says, sensible people control their temper. They earn respect by overlooking wrongs. Now let's go to Philippians chapter 2. Here, verse 3, Paul writes, don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interests, but taking interest in others too. And this next passage we actually read in our last message. We looked at the entire chapter of Romans 12, but I want to revisit here verse 16 through 18. It says, live in harmony with each other. Don't be too proud to enjoy the company of ordinary people, and don't think you know it all. Never pay back evil with more evil. Do things in such a way that everyone can see you are honorable. Do all that you can to live in peace with everyone. And then I think James really sums it up really simply here in James chapter 1, verse 19. It says, understand this, my dear brothers and sisters. You must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. Human anger does not produce the righteousness God desires. All right, so a lot of scripture there, but let's now just kind of walk back through and, what are some conclusions that we can draw from some of the passages we just read? How can we apply those in our lives, right? The first thing I think that seems to be pretty clear as we read through these passages is that selfishness, anger, resentment, and pride really are leading factors in relational problems. And you might say, Sam, I don't need to read the Bible and know that. I just live life and I can see that these things are really leading factors in relational problems. Of course, the problem is that we often see selfishness, anger, resentment, and pride in other people as being the problem in our relationships. But we don't always realize that it's actually also our own selfishness, our own anger, resentment, and pride that we are contributing as leading factors in our relational problems. So as we look through these things, we really encourage you to not apply these to people that you're in relationship with. Anyone can do that. We really encourage you to apply these to yourself and to really evaluate and go, where am I doing this? In what ways am I contributing these problems to the relationship? because very rarely in a relational issue is only one party at fault. And so we got to slow down and go, okay, what problems am I contributing to maybe the communication issues that are happening in my friendships, in my family, and in my marriage, etc., right? Second point I think we can draw from what we read is that personal humility really is the key to better communication with others. And there is a lot of value in learning how to overlook offense wherever we can. Now that's really hard, right? Because so many of us have been taught to maybe never let anyone do anything wrong to us. And if anyone wrongs you or offends you, you need to bring up every single thing and you need to work that out. And if somebody did something wrong, they need to apologize and the whole thing. And actually Scripture teaches us, that if you can learn to overlook some offense, it's actually really good. Right? I mean, let's look back here at verse 11 in Proverbs 19. It says, sensible people control their temper. They earn respect by overlooking wrongs. And we know this to be true from our own experience, right? Like when you see somebody give up their right to be offended, especially over more trivial things that person had a right to be offended about, they could have been upset about it, and instead they look and they go, you know what, man, it's not that big of a deal. I'm going to let it go. I'm going to show the person some mercy. Maybe they had a rough day. Something like that. When you think about it, that makes you respect that person more because you see that person being self-controlled with their temper. You see them being less reactive. You see them being more merciful, right? And so not every single thing that people do wrong to you needs to be addressed. And in fact, a lot of the things that bother you and upset you are probably things that you could learn to overlook. We'll get into that some more. It doesn't mean that you let people off and you just allow people to go around abusing people, right? But you and I both know that there's a lot of things that we let bother us that we could easily let go of. And really everything would be better if we did, right? If we're just being honest. And then I think the fourth point we see from the scriptures we read today is that we need to be less reactive, more eager to listen and understand than to speak. And that's why James really buttons it up. I mean, if we were to actually do what James is talking about in James 1:19 through 20, and if we actually did that every day in all of our relationships, there would be so much less fighting, arguing, offense, drama, right? I mean, if we could actually learn to be quick to listen, slow to speak. I mean, if you've been in an argument with a spouse or a close friend or brother or sister, parent, whatever, close coworker, your boss, whoever it is, I mean, heck, even in an argument with your children, you know how bad as humans we all are at being quick to listen, slow to speak. I mean, just those two things alone, we're not good at it. And so many arguments, so much relational drama, so much communication breakdown in our relationships could be avoided if we were just eager to listen and actually more eager to listen than we were to speak. Like more interested in someone else's point of view than just saying what ours is, right? And the third thing James says, slow to get angry. Slow to get angry. And so that's why this final point we see is that we have to be less reactive, right? When we're very highly reactive in our relationships, like we can jump off the cliff way too fast. We can escalate arguments way too fast. We can misunderstand, misinterpret, right? The things that people say and do around us. I mean, how many times, again, these things are easier to usually recognize in people around us. So maybe if you're having a hard time seeing how you do this, let me just ask you. Think about a time when you saw one of your friends really misunderstand and overreact to something in one of their relationships. And you're sitting there in the conversation, and of course you're not affected by it, so you're listening more objectively, and you hear your friend do this, and you actually say to them, or maybe you at least think, I think you really took that wrong. I don't think that's what that person was saying. And therefore, I don't really think you should be upset because you're actually just misunderstanding. But because your friend is being so highly reactive in that situation, they honestly don't see it and they really think they have been wronged. But we can identify it when other people do it, but it's harder to identify it when we do it. And that's why James is saying we need to slow down, we need to be less reactive, we need to be better and quicker at listening to other people, and slower to say what we want to say. That doesn't mean you never say what you want to say. You probably should speak what's on your mind. But you should be more eager to hear the other person out first. And can you imagine if both people in a relationship were doing that with one another? I mean, like, so many relationships would be so strong and good, right? So what is this answer to the question, how can I get better at communication in relationships? You simply focus on being less reactive, more gracious, less defensive, and more honest. Now, as we think about just being honest, being open, and also being ready to not argue about every little thing because we learn to overlook offenses, the balance I want to bring to that is that we are going to have to grow in our maturity of knowing what offenses should I overlook and what offenses should I not overlook because they're a really big deal and they need to be dealt with, right? And it's going to be a process of learning to discern, what situation fits into which one of those categories. But there's a lot of offenses that really get us worked up, that really get us angry, put us in a terrible mood for days or weeks at a time, that so easily fit into the one that you can overlook, right? Like you're ordering food at a restaurant and they get the order wrong. How many times have you gotten really upset about that and rude and nasty about it? And that's like one of the easiest things to just let go and go, I'm not going to be mad the rest of the evening because they didn't cook my steak right. I'll just have them go and fix it and we'll move on with our life, right? Or maybe maybe a friend or a family member or even a spouse said something to you a little sideways and it seemed a little snarky, right? And it's because you're both busy, maybe they're tired, you're tired, it's been a long day or whatever. And if you were to stop and think about it, you would go, you know what? They probably got a little snarky because they're exhausted and it's been a long day. It's all right. I'm going to let it go, right? This is a great example of an offense you can overlook. It's pretty easy to do it if you just stop making everything about you. Okay, I know I'm getting harsh, guys, but I'm talking to myself, right? Like I am guilty of all of these things, and my wife can tell you that. So I'm doing the same work that we're all doing, right? But an example of offense to not overlook would be, let's say your spouse or your close friend or family member, they're snarky to you every night or all the time. You're going to need to bring that up because it can't go on and on and on forever, right? But they're snarky here and there every once in a while, and you totally understand why it's happening because it's been a long day, they're tired, you're tired. You see what I'm saying? We can begin to look at situations and go, not every offense has to be talked about. And that's why the scripture says that people actually earn respect when they learn to overlook offenses. And a lot of the teaching we see in scripture would actually encourage us to lay down our right to being offended. And oftentimes when I encourage people this way, the first thing they'll say is, something to the effect of explaining why they have a right to be offended. And my response, which they really don't like, which is really just what the scripture teaches, which is it's not about you having a right to be offended. I mean, there's no such thing as overlooking an offense that you don't even have a right to be offended about. That's a different matter. That's just you being silly. You can only overlook offenses that are actual offenses that you have a right to be overlooked. You can only lay down the right to be offended when you had the right to be offended in the first place, right? So the fact that you have a right to be offended is not relevant. Of course you have a right to be offended. That's not the question. Are you ready to lay down your right to be offended in order to build bridges, in order to show love, in order to show somebody mercy? Maybe they were rude to you, but it's been a terrible week for them. And what could really happen in that relationship is you could show them mercy and comfort and encouragement in the middle of what's been a terrible week, and not get so hung up on the fact that they were snappy in that moment, right? This lesson really is going to push against a lot of our natural ways of thinking because, frankly, we're so used to being defensive. We're so used to being fixated on our rights and making sure that other people are treating us well, that we don't slow down enough to ask ourselves, but am I treating other people well? It's not so much about, is everyone treating me right all the time? I can't control that. But am I treating other people right all the time? And how can I grow in treating other people right? So, our next steps in our relationships, in our communications with what we've been learning today, let me just give you some next steps in that. In your conversations with others, and I would say especially in your closest relationships, for many of us, the closest, many of us are married, and so our marriage relationship is the most close relationship that we have with anybody, just because of proximity. And so the possibility of being offended is very high, right? If you're married, you know that your spouse has triple the amount of opportunities to offend you on a daily basis that anybody else has. And so the closer the relationship, the more important it is that we work on these things. But here are some next steps, that I think we can discern from what we've read today. In our conversations with other people, we need to slow down. These are just some practical things you can do. Like, just don't be so reactive. Just don't react so fast. Slow down and think and listen and shut up for a minute. It will solve a lot of problems, believe me, it really will. The more that I've learned to do this in my life, I've been shocked by how much less drama there is in my life when I just slow down. Okay? So I'm continuing to work on this. I really encourage you to do the same. Second thing I encourage you to do is assume the best. When we do not have a lot of information, oftentimes in our conversations with people, there's a lot of information that we still don't have and we're trying to learn. And in the meantime, in that gap of information, we are left to have to assume some things. And a lot of problems can happen in our relationships with people because in that gap where we have to make some assumptions, we're inclined to make assumptions about the worst, right? So we assume the worst in people instead of assuming the best in people. If you assume the best, you might be wrong. It might be worse than what you assumed. But by assuming the best in people, it helps you be less reactive. It helps you listen better. And until proven otherwise, get into the habit of assuming the best of intentions until you have a good reason not to, right? Instead of the opposite, which is I assume the worst intentions until they convince me that it's actually better. That way is going to cause a lot of arguments. It's going to cause a lot of strife. It's going to cause a lot of issues. Don't do it. Learn to assume the best in people until you have more information. A third thing you can do is to resist taking things personally. This causes a lot of strife in our relationships because there are things that we take personally and they're not personal at all. And again, this is something that we can easily recognize when other people do, but we have a harder time recognizing when we do it because, you guessed it, we're taking things personally, right? But think about when you've seen this in your friends and family, when you've seen them interpret something as a personal attack against them, and you're looking and going, that had nothing to do with you. Why are you taking that personally? Well, we need to apply that same question to ourselves. Why am I taking this personally? Do I have a good reason for that? Right? So we need to resist taking things personally. And here's a really helpful thing that's going to make you a better listener. Just be genuinely curious. Okay? When you're talking with people, especially when you're communicating with people you're in close relationship with, be curious about what they're thinking, why they're thinking it, what is their point of view, how do they see the situation. They may be wrong. I guarantee you they're not more wrong than you are. They're probably just wrong in some other ways, right? or I can't guarantee that, but oftentimes, let me scale that back for a minute. Oftentimes people in relationship are just as wrong as one another, and we're just wrong in different ways. And so, assume the best, resist taking things personally, but really be curious, right? Like, I want to understand. They may be wrong, but I still want to understand the way that they're seeing the situation, just so I can kind of meet them in a more middle ground and we can actually work this out. So slow down, assume the best, resist taking things personally, and be curious. If you do those 4 things, or even 1 or 2 of those things, you're going to see a really dramatic shift in your communication, in the relationships that you have. And it applies to literally all of your relationships, everywhere from things as close as marriage and children to, coworkers, bosses. I mean, this can even apply to, the person serving you at a restaurant, right? By learning these practices, we can really get better at communication and relationships. So I really encourage you today, before the day's over, and maybe just once this message is done, just spend some time in prayer, asking God to show you where you need to improve in the way that you talk to people, especially in your close family and friends. Just spend some time asking God to show you those things. Where specifically do you need to improve in the way that you talk to the people around you, especially those who are close to you? And then let me just give you some devotional questions to just kind of ponder and think through this week and really pray about. First one is, how might you be treating people unfairly because of the way that other people have hurt you in the past? That's a big one. Sometimes we bring drama into our relationships because we're already assuming that this new person is going to do what the old person did. That's not fair. And oftentimes we don't see it. So how might you be treating people unfairly because of the way other people have hurt you in the past? How can you slow down and be less reactive in your marriage, in your family, or in your friendships? That's the second question for you. And then the third question is, what offenses are you holding on to that you need to let go of? For many of you, when you think about that third question, you're going to probably pretty quickly know the answer. And there's going to be some part of you that you need to let go of that offense, but you just feel like you can't. And let me just encourage you, you can. You can, and you do it by focusing on the forgiveness and the mercy and the grace that God has for you. And the more that you really look and go, man, the Lord has so much mercy for me, it'll actually stir within you the power to show mercy to other people, especially in those offenses that you know you need to let go of. So I do hope this time has been helpful for you and helpful for you, and I really just pray that it's been a blessing. I appreciate you spending time with us today. We're actually going to be picking up this series after the holidays. So we did 4 lessons on You Asked For It, and we'll be doing more starting in January. We're going to take a break for the holidays, and we're going to be looking through the season of Advent and what that really means for us as believers. So looking forward to that series. We'll be picking up some more questions on the topic of things that you guys would like to hear about and just have us explore in our Sunday morning message. So just check out our socials. We'll be putting up links where you can share more questions that you'd like to have us talk about in a Sunday morning message. But in the meantime, we love you, appreciate you being here with us, and just pray that God will bless you today. All right, bye.
We are so glad you have joined us today. To learn more about Hope Valley Church and get access to free resources, just go to www.hopevalley.church. There, you will also find links to connect with us on Facebook and Instagram, as well as links to our podcasts, now available on Apple, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. And if you're watching this on YouTube, Please take a moment to like and subscribe so you can stay up with new videos coming out every week. Hope Valley is a church based in Winchester, Virginia that meets in homes around the region. So if you'd like to find out more about home churches, how they work, and how to locate one near you, just go to hopevalley.church/house. Thanks again for joining us, and may God bless you today.